Are you interested in the Tim Drake character but don't know where to start? Well, look no further. In this video, I'm going to give you a reading recommendation list to help you get caught up with the character. I'm also going to explain some major DC Comics events to help you get a better understanding of Tim Drake. I'll try to make things as simple as possible given the fact that comics, especially DC Comics with all of its reboots, can be pretty confusing. But before we get into my reading recommendation list for the best Robin in the Bat family, please be sure to like and subscribe to Reverb Comics. You do not want to miss out on our awesome content. I should mention that I made a video on why Tim Drake is such an awesome and relatable character. The link's in the description if you want to check it out and get a better understanding of the character. Now, to start off our list, we have Batman: A Lonely Place of Dying. This is where the character first appeared in the comics in 1990. Like all of the Robins, Tim Drake left quite an impression on Bruce Wayne. Unlike Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, Tim had no tragic backstory. He came from a healthy family with solid foundations. He got Batman's attention after he figured out Batman and Robin's true identities. Like a lot of kids like myself, he grew up as a huge fan of Batman and Robin. One day, he watched footage of Batman and Robin fighting the Penguin. He noticed that Robin performed a quadruple somersault. This maneuver is a rare move that only the Flying Graysons at Haley's Circus could do. Tim was aware of the tragedy that Dick Grayson went through. He was actually there the night at Haley's Circus when Dick's parents passed away. Tim Drake's family actually took a picture with the Flying Graysons before the incident happened. Since Tim knew that Dick Grayson is one of the few people on this earth that can actually perform that move, he deduced that Dick Grayson is Robin. He also figured out that Bruce Wayne is Batman since Dick Grayson was his ward. As you'd expect, Batman denied the whole thing. Even though Bruce and Dick played dumb, Tim insisted that Batman needs a Robin. He noticed that ever since Batman has been flying solo, he became super aggressive and reckless. This of course was caused by what happened with Jason Todd, the previous Robin, who was presumed to be dead at the time. What's interesting about Tim is that he did not want to be Robin. He just insisted that Batman needs a Robin. During this story arc, Batman and Nightwing deal with Two-Face, but unfortunately, the both of them get captured. Once Tim and Alfred become aware that they are both in danger, they decide to help. Tim put on a Robin uniform and confronts Two-Face. Tim manages to help Batman and Nightwing escape, but Two-Face gets away. Shortly after, Tim uses his quick thinking to catch Two-Face. After capturing the villain, Batman admits that he's impressed with Tim and he decides to train him. Given what happened to Jason Todd, Batman put Tim through much more training than any other Robin, and he became very protective of Tim. Next up on our list, we have Detective Comics issue 618 and 619. In this story, Tim's parents go through an awful endeavor. Both Jack and Janet Drake pursued archaeology and they traveled a lot. Unfortunately, the Drakes got kidnapped by Obey-a-Man in the Caribbean. Obey-a-Man tried to sacrifice Jack and Janet in a fire ceremony for the spirits. He gave them both a powerful nerve toxin that left Jack paralyzed and his wife dead. Unfortunately, Batman could not stop the tragedy from happening. Eventually, Obey-a-Man was captured and brought to justice. After grieving, Tim had to balance his life as Robin while helping to care for his dad. Next up on the list, we have the Robin series by Chuck Dixon. Chuck Dixon did an amazing job with the Nightwing series, so it only makes sense that he did an amazing job with this new Robin series. In this storyline, Tim Drake travels to foreign countries to perfect his skills as Robin. This story arc was really interesting as Batman was not around to help him out. At one point in the story, Tim faces off with the Joker and survives. Obviously, Tim was afraid to face off with the Joker, but he still summons the will to prove himself and manages to outmaneuver the villain. A lot of cool DC Comics characters like the Huntress and Lady Shiva made appearances in the series. Next up on the list, we have Teen Titans by Geoff Johns. This series did a really good job of showcasing Tim Drake's intelligence and leadership skills. For me, the Titans of Tomorrow story arc was a standout story in that series. In this story arc, the Titans travel to the future to meet older versions of themselves. Tim Drake meets an older version of himself that dons the Batman mantle. The catch is that this version of himself abandoned the Bat family's sacred no-killing rule. What was really cool about this story is that all of these young superheroes were outclassed by their older counterparts, yet they still decided to fight them. It was a real underdog story. In fact, it was less about action and more about how these characters reacted to their evil counterparts. While this series was not as iconic as the Marv Wolfman's New Teen Titans run, it was still pretty fun and it handled the Tim Drake character pretty well. Alright, next up on the list we have Batman 0 Hour. This is a story where a lot of time travel shenanigans happen. At one point in the story, Tim meets a younger version of Dick Grayson as Robin. After they got things sorted out and started to trust one another, they teamed up to catch a criminal. This story did a pretty good job of highlighting the differences between the two characters. While Dick Grayson had superior natural athleticism compared to Tim Drake proved he had much better detective skills than Dick. Now, this next story is not really a Tim Drake story, it just provides context for what comes next. Batman Nightfall had a mixed reactions with the fans, but it still had iconic Batman moments nonetheless. To make a long story short, Batman comes across Azrael, otherwise known as John Paul Valley. John Paul Valley discovers that he has been unconsciously trained since birth to be an assassin for an ancient religious order. In this story, Batman and Azrael slowly build a partnership with one another. Eventually, Batman fights Bane and gets his back broken by the villain, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. Bruce asks John Paul Valley to take the Batman mantle as he's no longer capable of fighting criminals. Tim argued that he should have asked Dick Grayson to take up the mantle, but decided against it since he thought he had his own responsibilities protecting Bloodhaven as Nightwing. Bruce's decision proves to be a bad one since Azrael's mental health quickly declined into his Batman career. He quickly became violent, unstable, and reckless. After Bruce somehow gained the ability to walk again, he got Robin and Nightwing to help him take down Azrael. After all this happens, Bruce takes some time off to continue his rehabilitation. He finally makes the right decision and hands the Batman mantle to Dick Grayson in the Batman Prodigal story arc. In my opinion, the Batman Prodigal story arc was okay. The main issue that I had with it is that Dick Grayson and Tim Drake were very similar in terms of their personality. They were both pretty lighthearted and optimistic. I find Batman stories work best when one character has a dark and brooding attitude and someone else comes along, like Robin, to balance things out with their upbeat and optimistic personality. I will say this though, Batman Prodigal had some pretty great Tim Drake moments. At one point in the story, Tim tells Dick that he's straight up not ready to go on a mission. This might seem counterintuitive, but I really like this moment as it made Tim feel like a real and relatable character. It's completely normal to get imposter syndrome every once in a while, and for Tim to admit his limits helps us really get behind the character. Later on in the comics, Bruce completes his rehabilitation and resumes the Batman mantle. Dick went back to protecting Bloodhaven as Nightwing, and Bruce and Tim continued to protect Gotham as Batman and Robin. Now, next up on our list, we have Robin Unmasked. A lot of fun things happen in this story as we get to see Tim balance his superhero life with what he's dealing with in high school and what he's dealing with at home. In this story, his dad went through a lot of rehabilitation and gained the ability to walk again. Unfortunately, his dad figured out that Tim Drake was lying to him the whole time. He figured out that Tim Drake was actually Robin. This forced him to step down as Robin for a while, and Stephanie Brown had to step in and be Batman's new partner. But after his dad got over everything and realized how important Tim Drake was to Gotham, he let Tim Drake become Robin once again. After this, another pivotal moment in Tim Drake's life happened in the Identity Crisis storyline. This is not to be confused with that other really disturbing Identity Crisis storyline. Believe me, you do not want to read that. In Tim Drake's Identity Crisis story arc, Captain Boomerang took a mercenary job to kill Jack Drake. Both Bruce and Tim rushed to the scene as soon as they could, but they were too late. Both Jack and Captain Boomerang killed each other. Right before Captain Boomerang murdered him, Jack shot him in self-defense. For a while, this left Tim in a very angry and brooding state of mind. Now, this next story is not a Tim Drake story. Again, it just provides context for what happens next. In the Final Crisis storyline, Batman presumably dies at the hands of Darkseid as a last-ditch effort to protect all of reality. Even though Bruce Wayne died, Tim Drake was not convinced. The Red Robin series explores Tim as he's trying to solve the Bruce Wayne mystery. When the Red Robin series picks up, Tim is furious that he lost the Robin mantle to Damian Wayne. Dick Grayson picked up the Batman mantle once again, and he took on Damian Wayne since he needed serious social reform. Damian grew up in the League of Assassins, hence Dick wanted to keep an eye on him so that he wouldn't kill anyone. Dick also saw Tim as an equal, so it didn't feel right to him to have Tim as Robin. As a consequence of all this, Tim took on the Red Robin mantle and traveled across the world to find Bruce Wayne. Along the way, he comes across the League of Assassins and gains the respect of Ra's al Ghul. Ra's calls Tim Detective, which is only a title he uses for Batman. Now, these story arcs covered Tim Drake's career as Robin in the post-Infinite Crisis continuity. When DC Comics got rebooted, Tim had some pretty fun adventures as Robin in the New 52 era of comics. However, much more significant things happened to the character in the newly rebooted Rebirth continuity. Some pretty cool things happened in that era. For example, in the Rise of the Batman story arc, Tim is part of a new Bat Family team that consists of Cassandra Cain, Stephanie Brown, Kate Kane, aka Batwoman, and a reformed Clayface. At one point in the Rebirth continuity, he gets captured by Mr. Oz, who reveals himself to be Jor-El. For those of you who don't know, Jor-El is Superman's dad, who supposedly escaped Krypton's destruction. While captured, Tim meets a Darkest Timeline version of himself as Batman. As you'd expect, Tim was not happy learning about a future version of himself that disrespects Batman's no-killing rule. When he returned back to Gotham, he had to reconcile with what he just learned. Hence, it led to some interpersonal drama with his long-term girlfriend, Stephanie Brown. Later on, Tim breaks up with Stephanie and later comes to terms with his identity in the Batman Urban Legends Anthology. Tim realizes he's bisexual after spending time with his old friend, Bernard. The only thing that I found to be really odd about Tim during the Rebirth continuity is that he went under the Red Robin name, but he had a uniform that was really similar to what Robin typically wears. I mean, why would you call yourself Red Robin if there's a lot of green in your uniform? That's comic book logic for you sometimes. That concludes my reading recommendation list for the Tim Drake character. Keep in mind that there are plenty of fun adventures with the character in the Young Justice and the new Batman Adventures cartoons. And he also makes appearances in the live-action Titan show. But what do you think? Do you think that this is a good reading recommendation list for the Tim Drake character? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe to Reverb Comics so that you do not miss out on our awesome content. Stay groovy.